So I believe everyone is here, Dr. Harsha?
Yes, ma'am. So I think we can go ahead and start with the session.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So good evening, one and all. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dr. Harshavardhan. I work as an assistant professor here at Geetham School of Physiotherapy, Geetham University. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all on this occasion. Every year on the 8th of September, we celebrate World Physiotherapy Day with the theme as Long COVID and Rehabilitation. This is the theme for the year. We had an eventful week celebrating our profession. The celebration started on 3rd September with a webinar titled Identifying Long COVID-19 Related Tiredness and Fatigue, following which we conducted a free physiotherapy camp and consulted to treat patients with long COVID. Today, we are hosting a panel discussion on understanding and managing symptoms with long COVID. Eminent panelists have been invited to share their expertise and give insights into a holistic approach in managing long COVID or post-COVID syndrome. Before we proceed any further, let me introduce our director, Geetham School of Physiotherapy, Dr. Madhuri Kasi ma'am. She has been the founding director of Geetham School of Physiotherapy. She has a wide experience in the field spanning around more than 16 years. I request Dr. Madhuri ma'am to please say a few words before we go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Harsha. First, wish you all a very happy World Physiotherapy Day from the entire GSPT team. Indeed, World Physiotherapy Day is celebrated to mark the solidarity and acknowledge the efforts and tireless work of all the physiotherapists around the world. Looking back, we all agree that there were so many changes, and the profession of physiotherapy has been dynamic, and we have evolved a lot more in the past few years. But I would have to say that in the past 1 year alone, the profession has taken a huge leap by rising up to the challenges of the pandemic, incorporating telehealth, tele-rehab actually, as one of the modes of delivery, which is very, very challenging for physiotherapy or a rehab. And with the many online webinars and connecting to all the experts all around the world, the knowledge imparted and the knowledge base have actually improved and is accessible to everybody. Well, everybody knows about the autonomous bill or the bill to practice independently in India, which is a huge thing for the physios in India. And our membership back with the World Physiotherapy or the Indian IAP membership with the World Physiotherapy, all of this in the last year says a lot about the progress we made, not only the progress we made, but our commitment towards progress. I congratulate all the physiotherapists and the students on these achievements and wish all of you a very best for the future endeavors. So Geetham School of Physiotherapy actually is established in 2020 with a dedication to impart higher standards of education in physiotherapy. With so many features like focus on research and evidence-based practice, collaboration with other top international universities, and outcome-based curriculum, GSPT is also with a similar progressive ideals. And as you all know, one of our greatest achievement or like the big thing is the commendable work that the physiotherapists have done in the area of COVID rehabilitation last year and still continuing. It is so exciting to have the experts who have contributed significantly in this area on our panel today. So I thank and welcome all our panelists, Dr. Varsha, Dr. Sundar Kumar, Dr. Nafees, Dr. Sri Krishna Garu for being here and sharing your knowledge in this area. Looking forward to hearing from you all. Again, welcome and thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Harsha.
Thank you. As Madhuri ma'am has already welcomed, I'll just give a brief overview on who our panelists are, our excellent panelists. So we are having 4 panelists. Firstly, Dr. Nafees, Dr. Sri Krishna Garu, Dr. Sundar, and Dr. Varsha Kopikar. So firstly, let me introduce Varsha ma'am. So Ms. Varsha Kopikar, she has a wide experience spanning over 27 years and had a pleasure of working with her at CareFit, and all her patients love her. And she is one person who makes everybody's life so much better, and she is very, very good at research, and she has about 10 plus years on hands-on clinical research, and she is one of the quality heads at Cure Fit. She is one of the 3 quality heads, and she is also a practicing diabetic, she's also a diabetic counselor and also a clinician. We welcome you, ma'am. Next, let me introduce. Thank you, ma'am. Let me introduce Dr. Sundar Kumar sir. So he is currently working as an assistant professor at Ramaya Medical College. He was one of the very first physios to formulate a protocol and a performer for long COVID patients. And he has been a forerunner in the field of community medicine. And we welcome you, sir. And also let me introduce Dr. Nafis Syed. Sir is currently almost completed his PhD. He is currently in Columbia, Vancouver. He has collaborated with so many universities abroad. He has a good lab experience and as well as clinical experience, and his exercise prescription skills are too good. And we are very, very lucky to have Nafis sir on the panel. We welcome you, sir. And let me also welcome Dr. Sri Krishna Garu. He is the head of the department at JIMSR here at Vishakhapatnam. So he has helped so many COVID patients during the pandemic. He has been a forerunner. He has done many online consults. That is, he was the first to start with these teleconsultation sessions for COVID affected patients at JIMSR. And we are really lucky to have you on, sir, and we are looking forward to hear your perspectives and takes on various issues and also how to manage this long COVID symptoms. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Last but not the least, let me get Dr. Sudhir on board. He is our clinical chief here at JIMSR. He has been there since the first day the department was initiated at JIMSR, and he is going to be the moderator for the session, and he'll be putting forth all your questions, and let us see how he takes the discussion forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Sudhir, sir. With this, I'm handing the panel over to Dr. Sudhir, sir. We welcome you, sir. Over to Dr. Sudhir.
Thank you, Dr. Harshvardhan. And first of all, a very good evening to all of you and to all the panel members and all the attendees for today's panel discussion. And I would like to wish you all a very happy World Physiotherapy Day before I start off with. So the first question which I would like to put ahead is generalized to all the specialists we have here, that might be a psychiatrist or a nutritionist and dietitian, or even a senior most expertise physiotherapist as well. So the first question I would like to ask is there or do we have any specific strategy to self-assess our health status post-COVID? And this question is open to all the panel members. Anyone, please go ahead to initiate it.
Go ahead, Dr. Krishna.
Yeah. Good evening to all the panelists and the other attendees that are attending this World Physiotherapy Day on webinar. I will thank you all for attending. And from my side, what I would suggest is regarding how to assess one's functional state. I think there are some scales available in the internet post-COVID to assess the functional status of an individual post-COVID. What I personally tell each and everyone is, you draw 2 tables. One, how was your day when you're not affected with COVID? And how was now after COVID? So any impairment in your functioning, the way when you get up from sleep or when you go to sleep, or how you are able to perform your daily routine, previously without COVID and now with COVID. You rate yourself rather than you rate yourself, okay, before COVID, I used to work in front of the computer for at least 2 to 3 hours without any mental fatigue. Now, if I start opening the computer, I'm feeling little bit lethargic. So you rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 or whatever it is, and you see your prognosis or whether your functional impairment is mild, moderate, or severe. Based on that, I personally suggest these things to my patients if anyone asks me how to assess myself. And this is from my side, Sudhir.
Thank you, sir.
Can I
Dr.
add
Shri, please go ahead.
Yeah. So good evening and thank you panelists for having me here. So here, like Dr. Sri Krishna mentioned, we also assess on the basis of quality of life, like you said. So is your energy level dipping? And if it is a drastic dip between the pre-COVID and the post-COVID, then you have to sort of work on your immunity levels and your energy levels. So this is something that, and this has to be a holistic approach. It cannot happen overnight. So one thing that the person needs to understand or the patient needs to understand is to have a little more patience in terms of, building their immunity, and it will take some months to be there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, madam. Dr. Nafeed, sir.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Could you please throw some insight of what's your perspective in how to self-assess an individual?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was just wondering if you guys could hear me, actually. Thanks, Sudhir. And I wish all the panelists and the people who are on this online channel to understand what physiotherapy has done for COVID. Congratulations again, and I wish you all a very happy World Physiotherapy Day today. So my experience, I would say fatigue and breathlessness as a respiratory physiologist and a physical therapist who have dealt with these patients, I can definitely say your fatigue becomes, like Dr. Sudhir has, Sri Krishna has mentioned, fatigue becomes the most important component that you need to evaluate, and nothing else better than self-evaluation would help you doing that. So be it mental, be it physical, but yes, when we talk about physical therapy and exercise prescription, we focus more on the physical perspective of the fatigue. But yeah, like Dr. Sri Krishna mentioned, mental fatigue also is the key component that one should assess in this particular condition to understand if this is really impacting your day-to-day activities and your quality of life.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Sundar, sir, could you please?
Very good afternoon to all the panelists, and I congratulate Geetham University for organizing this wonderful program. I'm given to understand that you started a new program about a year into the timeline at the moment, and I think you've hit the ground running. You've started really well by organizing programs across the board to plan a program for about a week of various activities, reaching out to different kinds of an audience. It's a beautiful gesture. I congratulate the organizing team and the entire team at Geetham University. And a very happy World Physio Day to everyone attending this program. I've been fortunate to be in a position to help many people who come back with post-COVID symptoms, both using online and offline sessions. As Dr. Sri Krishna had put it, I think the simplest way is to help them to compare with what was their pre-disease state and what difficulties, what they're having in over here. When we speak to a patient, especially when they're doing a teleconsult, and when we ask them to follow up on their symptoms, there are about a few parameters we try and ask them to review through. One, of course, is their breathlessness on exertion. We have observed that many people continue to experience breathlessness. When they do the regular routine activities, they don't get challenged sufficiently. When they're probably moving within their house for very simple tasks, they're not challenged themselves sufficiently. So they don't realize that they're actually compromised till they start getting back to their routine. I can use my same example. I was very active. I was quite active at work. And then when I had COVID, when this Delta variant came in, I was quite fine. I had a very mild symptom. I was vaccinated. But then when I joined my work after I finished mandatory quarantine period, I did experience fatigue like what we all have focused on. So it's an important symptom. Pain is another symptom what we've seen patients experiencing, different kinds of pain. So that is one. Personally, what I experience is that when I'm getting back to my routine work, I used to walk a little fast to do my clinical rounds, moving around. I could easily recognize the limitation what I was actually feeling in. And that's exactly what I've actually seen patients going through. So when I'm looking at my patients, I'll ask them to look at fatigue. I'm looking at them to look at their pain status, any new kind of a pain, what they're experiencing, breathlessness and exertion, and maybe oxygen saturation monitoring, if there's a provision to do that. These are in terms of symptoms. Then the other things what I ask them to look at is in terms of their sleep, their appetite, their aerial independence. So we ask them to check on these parameters. As Dr. Sri Krishna said, there are multiple scales available. What we use in our center is called a post-COVID functional status scale. It got published very soon after the pandemic started. It came as a letter to the editor, but quite widely used. It's graded from 0 to 5 based on the degree of support or degree of symptoms and kind of a support what they meet. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a very simple scale for people to understand across board. So we tend to use those in our patient education and follow-up methods.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And now, Dr. Sri Krishna, sir, by keeping in mind your expertise as a psychiatrist, I would like to ask you how to cope with post-COVID syndrome from a mental health point of view. And when does an individual need to reach out for help to a psychiatrist?
Yeah, does anyone in India bother about mental health? That is the first question from my side. Most of the people are worried about physical health generally, but once individual who is mentally fit is physically fit too. So mental health comes as a primary importance, but many of us neglect this mental health related issues. And post-COVID mental health point of view, if you are asking me, uh, like any other routine advices that I give, first and foremost, avoid the fake news that you see in your that you get in your WhatsApp messages, or fake news or misinformation consumption. Don't go into these kinds of things. That's the first thing which I generally suggest my patients. And next is good sleep. Unless you have a good sleep, you can't be active the next day. And all our organs need to rest in our sleep, our brain too. And once you don't have good sleep, your brain is not functioning well. So maintaining a good sleep hygiene is important. And exercise, any amount of exercise, whether you do it for 10-15 minutes, when you do exercises, you have a release of endorphins, which generally makes you a sense of good well-being. So small amount of exercises, of mild exercises for 15 to 20 minutes a day would be beneficial. And finally, in a philosophical way, take a day as it comes, and bother about things that are in your hand, and don't bother about things which are not in your hands. These are some of my advices to maintain a good mental health, be it not be it post COVID or anything.
Yes, sir.
That's it, Sudhir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The second question you asked me, when to consult a psychiatrist.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because it's a, I mean, let's say, for example, a person is a very fit person, and then after the COVID, like he's unable to do his functional activities or not able to hit the sport or play the game as he was. And then it tends to put them into a lot of stress mentally. And then some might even get into, initial depression. So when do you think that individual might have to run to a psychiatrist or approach to a psychiatrist?
Yeah. When you generally take the symptoms of psychiatric illnesses, when you see the emotions, happiness is a normal emotion, sadness is a normal emotion, irritation is also normal emotion, frustrations are normal emotions. These emotions, when your family members or your friends find it little bit tough to handle, or your wife says that you're getting irritated very easily, or when your friend says that you're getting frustrated very easily, or when someone comments that this is not yourself, you're feeling lonely for past so many days. When you hear these kinds of things from our friends or family members or colleagues, that time one should recognize that, yeah, some I'm becoming mentally a little bit unstable, or I'm moving away from the normalcy. And that is when he should recognize and he should consult a psychiatrist. Otherwise, these emotions will happen to us in day to day life. Every day we experience sadness, every day we experience happiness, every day we sometimes we get irritated, but again we come back to the normalcy. And when any person is not able to come back to his normalcy and is finding difficult to come back to normalcy, any emotions, then I think that is the time he or she has to recognize and take a mental help. That's it, Sadish.
Okay, thank you, sir. That was very smooth and easy explanation. It will be reaching every common man as well very easily. And thank you once again. And the next question goes to Miss Varsha Madam. I would like to ask you, what are the dietary requirements post-COVID, and is a regular meal enough?
When we are talking about post-COVID, we know that there is a lot of wasting which has happened. So your diet needs to have a little bit more protein than the usual. And as it is, Indians have a very large amount of carbs, and they are not focused on having a good amount of protein. So including protein in each meal makes a lot of difference. Especially the main meals here would be breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that is a very contributing factor. Plant-based proteins, that is coming from the pulses, legumes, lentils, are easily digestible. Lean meats in the form of fish or egg whites, chicken, that's again easily acceptable and easily digestible. So a focus should be maintained on protein. When we are talking also about a lot of wasting, then having a good amount of vitamins, especially now vitamin C is in vogue, and we all know that vitamin C plays an immense role in immunity. So immunity boosters, as we call them, vitamins and minerals. So when we talk about vitamins, vitamin C in the form of any citrus fruits like amla or orange, or you have lemon, drumstick leaves. Drumstick leaves again is in vogue these days, called as moringa. You have pineapple, guava. So very simple, locally available seasonal fruits can be included. And it's not just my recommendation, but it's a WHO guideline to have 2 to 3 helpings of vegetable salads and fruits on a daily basis. You have vitamin E. Vitamin E, vitamin D are fat soluble vitamins, which means that our body has the ability to store them. So vitamin E can be easily, taken by, you have number of vegetable oils, you have olives, you have sunflower seeds, you have peanuts, almonds. So they are excellent sources of vitamin E. Vitamin D, as we know it as a sunshine vitamin. So again, little sunbathing for 10 to 15 minutes helps a lot. Again, you have a lot of fortified foods which are high in vitamin D. Again, a good source of vitamin D could be salmon, milk, fortified milk. You have fortified yogurt. Taking a lot of probiotics in the meal in the form of simple curds, buttermilk helps a lot. Again, a good amount of minerals. So minerals in the form of zinc, where you're taking some lentils, or you're taking unprocessed meat, shellfish. These help a lot. So it has to be a good balanced meal. So we say that the more colors that you add onto your plate, you're ensured of a balanced meal. So that has to be given importance.
Thank you, madam. Dr. Nafiz Syed, sir, could you please tell us what is your experience with long COVID syndrome?
Thanks, Sudhir. I would appreciate if you just call me Nafiz. I'm happy to hear that rather than sir.
Right, sir.
So my experience in COVID, of course, definitely not close to what you, the experts sitting on this panel, probably had. Being fortunate to be in India to see such a vast spread of the disease there. But yes, in the limited extent of what I have seen COVID in Canada, yes, it is something which probably mankind did not ever think about experiencing it. So the first and foremost thing that the people living in the Western countries, or so-called the first world countries, are facing is, like, probably Dr. Sri Krishna would have been the busiest person here in the West about the mental health. Primarily because physical activity and physical exercise is given the most importance here. People do have their routines built up in a way that they do some kind of physical activity. And the post-COVID, or the long COVID so-called, is what has become a situation where people get identified very faster. And like Dr. Sundar had indicated, that just taking their day-to-day activities, the moment they see the difference, that's how they point out that, yes, we are affected or there's something wrong in their system, because the physical activity is known to them prior to COVID hit. And if I have to take an example, probably I've treated one of the most unfortunate patient that I would say is a police cop, who's, I'm sure we all have seen in the movies, the police cops of the West are pretty aggressive and pretty physically fit. So one of those cops that I have treated, yes, the guy who used to probably do about 180 pounds of chest press and do about, I don't know if you ever had a mountain climbing experience, the way we are looking at probably the meds of about 10 to 12, a crazy activity. And these guys do it day in, day out. And when you ask them post-COVID, yes, the situation is they have difficulty in breathing. They are fatigued to the extent that they cannot walk from a chair A to chair B. So these not only affect them physically, of course, but yeah, a huge impact on their mental health, because people do understand that they are going to either take a longer time or probably never going to get back to their physical exertional abilities. So that has affected a lot in the West. I would say, at least in Canada, what we have seen is that COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. And
Hope
Dr.
answered.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. And the next question also is to you, Dr. Syed. We do have a good number of ventilatory boundaries of lung or various lung volumes. Okay, so when speaking with post-COVID or during the COVID infection, which parameters are most commonly affected? Is it inspiratory related or expiratory related, and how can one work upon to regain them back?
So I'm sure most of the panelists on this panel here know the fact that there's still a gamut of emerging research is coming out. We don't still have a clarity on how the symptoms are going to affect it. But from what we know today, definitely I can say that if people do persist to have dyspnea over the period of, say, 1 to 2 months post-COVID, those are the people who definitely would have to understand that they are heading towards the restrictive pattern of disease. So when I say restrictive pattern, I'm looking at people having struggled to take a deep breath. It could be a basic compromise on their tidal volume, or it could be as simple as a functional vital capacity. So a simple spirometer reading could show a significant difference. In fact, in one of the studies that we have done here, where we've categorized people with dyspnea and without dyspnea, we did see that the people with persistent dyspnea in about 2 to 3 months post-COVID did show that there is an impact on their pulmonary function, especially inclining towards the restrictive pattern. So that restrictive pattern is not a good thing, because eventually as we age, we all know that our capacities are going to be falling. And if you are young and you're hit by COVID, retain dyspnea for about 2 to 3 months, then probably the decline is going to be even faster. So keep a watch on that pulmonary function and see if there is an indication that you're heading towards a restrictive pattern. Then probably talk to your pulmonologist, talk to your exercise physiologist and the physical therapist who's taking care of your lungs, and see if you can do a ton of these inspiratory muscle trainings, ton of these diaphragmatic breathings, or anything which is kind of protecting you from shrinking the lung or restricting the lung.
Thank you. And Dr. Sundar, sir, could you please tell what are the factors which actually have pushed you to formulate a protocol for long COVID patients. And can you please throw some limelight on the protocol which you have designed?
Thank you, Dr. Sudeep, for the question. We started having post-COVID patients in our clinic in August 6th, 2020. Our hospital started admitting patients on June 24th when the wave started building up in Karnataka. So the first set of people whom we actually treated were our nurses. We were quite surprised. It was a new disease. The world was learning about it. So we were trying to figure out what are the main components that we need to work on. Fortunately, we had worked with similar populations, not necessarily lung disease related populations. We did hear about a lot about fatigue, we did hear about a lot of breathlessness. So I had worked in oncology. I've been working with oncology, and that's fatigue is something which you commonly experience in oncology in patients following chemoradiotherapy. And I also work with geriatrics. There are two primary clinical areas I take care of it. So that gave us a good of a hands-on experience in terms of the probable problems that are getting reported in people with COVID by literature. So when we started evaluating our healthcare professionals as part of our teamwork, we realized a few points. One, they said they experienced fatigue, which was quite obvious and significant at that point in time. But beyond fatigue, they said they're not having too much of a difficulty. But then when we made them do a 6-minute walk test, that's when we realized it's not as simple as it looks. Invariably, a majority of the participants has low 6-minute walk distance. When we did 6-minute walk distance, we looked at monitoring a few parameters. We saw whether there is a saturation drop. We saw how much is the respiratory rate response to the 6-minute walk distance. We also saw their heart rate response. Then we realized that based on the severity and based on pre-morbid status and other factors, different people started presenting differently. So then we analyzed about 400 odd patients whom we had evaluated by the time of about October. We had seen about 400 post-COVID patients in our clinic. Our institute launched a formal post-COVID clinic on the 7th of September 2020, a multidisciplinary team comprising of a primary physician, a respiratory physician, a psychiatrist, an endocrinologist, cardiologist. So everybody was there available for us, and physio was there. So we actually shared our experience with each team members. So the pathway that actually evolved with time was that a physician would do a general screen. They will see whether a person can go for a physical stress assessment, whether the person is safe to go, primarily looking at cardiac markers, other inflammatory markers. And once they were cleared for that, then the physio team took over. And then we did a basic physical fitness assessment comprising of 6-minute walk distance, grip strength, sit-to-stand test, balance test, ADLs, urinary incontinence. So we developed a series of outcome measures to look at as we went by with patients reporting their outcomes and what we saw in literature. Now, this gave us a whole gamut of problems that we are dealing with. So now by this time, we've seen about more than 500 patients, and then we wanted to see, we're seeing patients, we're recognizing a common set of problems. How do we deal with that? So we do recognize and we communicate with the physician saying that this person has a saturation drop. We think this problem more with a lung related problem, or somebody who's got a very real high heart rate response to that. Probably there's more cardiac involvement. So the physician would recommend to go for a cardiologist evaluation. Maybe an echo would be done. Maybe more investigations should be done. So the impetus to start a protocol was that we had a wonderful multidisciplinary team, so that helps us to interact with a group of people and then know what each one was trying to look at. And then we started looking at pattern, but we wanted to know what would be a best way to deal with a particular problem. So what we did as a team, what we did is we listed out 4 broad areas of work. One is the general fatigue and weakness, kind of a general lethargy, malaise, and all that what people are reporting. So that is one kind of a problem. We combined loss of muscle strength with that as one particular issue. Then we tried identifying people who predominantly presented with pulmonary or respiratory problems. Then a next set of people who predominantly presented with cardiac related problems. And then a people with a combination of both pulmonary and cardiac related problems. So we were able to categorize our patients based on the assessments we did in these 4 broad categories. And once we were able to categorize them as a primary problem, is it a problem of dyspnea or exertion as a primary focus, or is it an accelerated heart rate response, or is it a combination of both, or is it a reduced muscle strength and fatigue combining together? So then we worked backwards and say, okay, if somebody's got more of a dyspnea, and then what strategies can we use it better for them? So then a focus started focusing in terms of a lot more of breathing exercises, chest wall mobility exercises to improve their lung capacity, and graded exercise training. So similarly, we adapted approaches based on our past experiences with other clinical populations. So we adapted that and then fit it into this model. And it worked in certain cases. We did experience where people did not respond in the way we would have anticipated. So we adapted to that and then we went on. So in a nutshell, what we did, we evaluated in the multidisciplinary team environment that helped us to strategize various methods to do it. We identified 4 key areas for intervention, devised protocols for that, based on our existing knowledge of evidence on the benefits of exercise on various systems. And then we implemented those programs on these patients. As of now, our clinic has seen more than 1,500 patients in the last 1 year, and one of the well-structured multidisciplinary clinic. But Dr. Krishna was saying that mental health is not given much of an importance. And in fact, a psychiatrist was an integral part of our multidisciplinary COVID team. So we recognize the value what they add to a team. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was a very fine contribution to the society. Thank you so much. And now this is a common question actually to Ms. Varsha, Dr. Sri Krishna, and Dr. Syed. Could you please tell what are the factors affecting sleep post-COVID infection, and are there any specific strategies to counter them? We can start with Dr. Sri Krishna, sir.
This COVID has not only affected many individuals physically, so when I say how it has affected mentally, it might be due to the financial loss. Are you hearing me, Sudhir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, it might be due to financial loss, loss of loved ones, depression, anxiety, stress. These are all part and parcel of the COVID. So when I take a just symptom of sleeplessness, it is a symptom of many diseases in psychiatry. One example, what I want to tell you is, if I have a stomach pain, do I get sleep?
No.
I don't get sleep if I have a stomach ache. So if I take a tablet for stomach ache, if I take a tablet for stomach ache, or should I take a tablet for sleep?
Stomach ache, sir.
Generally, I should take a tablet for stomach ache, so that when my ache goes, I get sleep too. The same way, the sleeplessness is part and parcel of many psychiatric diseases like anxiety, depression, PTSDs, and other related neurotic psychiatric illnesses too. So any person who's complains of sleeplessness post-COVID, always we try to assess other psychiatric illnesses like depressive, whether he or she has any depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder. And when you treat the primary component of anxiety or depression, then the sleep automatically regularizes. But during the initial stages, or to go with the non-pharmacological treatment of sleep, like any other physician or any other doctor, you should follow sleep hygiene. Like use only bed for sleep and not for anything else. You don't carry your laptop and start working on your bed. And that bed is only meant for sleeping and not any other purpose. And always see that the lights in your room are dim while you are sleeping. And what I tell them is, you go for a lukewarm bath and take lukewarm milk before going to sleep. And once, if you don't get sleep, you don't roll down on the bed. I always tell them, you get up from your bed, sit in a chair, and you read some book, not watching television, but reading a book. So after a while, when you start feeling dizzy, you go and sleep on your bed. These are some of the non-pharmacological treatments that we generally advise. And there are other things too, might be Dr. Varsha might more highlight them. I generally suggest there's something called as lavender oils. Lavender oil, if you put it on your pillow, or if you wipe it on lavender oils on pillow, it causes some sedating effect. And you can try it non-pharmacologically, but pharmacological treatment, if you ask me, on short-term prescription of benzodiazepines would be helpful for them. And if he or she fits into any depressive disorder or any kind of anxiety disorder, treat the depression, treat the anxiety. Yeah, the sleep regularizes. That's it, Sudhi, from it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Varsha, madam, can you please?
Yeah, so adding to what Sir just said, what are the good practices to sleep better? Like Sir said, sleep hygiene. So these are variety of different practices and habits that are necessary to have a good nighttime sleep and full daytime alertness. So something like, simple things like avoiding stimulants such as caffeine or alcohol, very spicy food, tobacco close to bedtime. Again, having a very large meal closer to bedtime can make one feel very acidic and has difficulty in falling asleep because the metabolism in the body is very active when the digestive system is active. So establishing a very routine, regular bedtime, so that your sleep and wake up cycle, what we call as a circadian rhythm, is in sync. Again, limit your screen time. With people now working from home, we've realized even otherwise, people have have just extended their time of sleep, and they binge watch a lot of serials in the night. So limit your screen time and just before going to bed, because gadgets also emit a lot of light. They block melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, and that hinders your sleep. Make sure that your sleep environment is good. In terms of diet, we advise, like Sir said, when a person feels very tensed, we advise them chamomile tea. Some things like, a little nutmeg, a dash of nutmeg, cinnamon in a cup of hot water is proved to be very beneficial. Again, a little warm milk, like Sir said, because it's high in tryptophan. Walnuts or almonds in the night. A small banana is again proven to be very useful. Yoga asanas, some asanas like Shavasana, or we have Viparit Karani. These again are proven to be very beneficial. We have also seen that people who have natural oils, or even simple things like soaking feet in warm water, having a little Epsom salts in that also calms your body. So these are simple things which people can regulate, and these are very doable things that people can adopt to. Yeah, that's from my side. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. And Dr. Syed, could you please share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I probably just would add to both the doctors that have just said, talked about the lack of sleep and what could be done. In my experience, what we have seen is, like Dr. Sri Krishna earlier, to the fear, the component of fear is the biggest factor which is kind of affecting the sleep. And the fear we have seen is primarily for two reasons. One is a financial, because we are all insurance-driven health sector here. So if you're not covered with insurance, yes, it's a big fear. The second big fear is the dyspnea. So dyspnea makes you, I don't know if you've read the literature recently published, it kind of gets you into a vicious cycle of fear component and then the mental anxiety, leading to a downward circle or downward cascade of events, which is going to affect you completely. So we are battling in COVID-19 with two situations. That is, one, fatigue. The second one is dyspnea. So even if a patient wants to be physically active, motivated by the teams, multidisciplinary team, of course, the challenge here is the fatigue stops them. And the moment they initiate some basic physical tasks, the dyspnea stops them. So we, as a physical person, we have never seen a situation where the patients are getting exerted to the fullest. And that has limited the issues where patients are experiencing problems with sleep. So this downward cascade, if it could be intervened, or it could be amalgamated into our protocols, where we can impact both the effect of dyspnea and minimize the effects of dyspnea, and then have a component of fatigue come down, then we have envisioned that people are better in their sleep and they're able to take care of the after effects of not having sleep. That's from my answer there.
Thank you. Dr. Sundar, could you please tell me how to counter post-COVID fatigue, as it's always been a very important, disturbingly, seen clinical feature post-COVID infection?
Fatigue in general is very poorly understood because there are a lot of subjective components and also the physiological components going on. And many people have experienced fatigue in COVID situations. One of the possible mechanisms being proposed is the role of inflammatory markers, inflammatory response that happens in individuals during COVID, in the body's attempt to fight COVID. There's a significant amount of inflammatory response. And that inflammatory state is known to be a trigger for fatigue. So when there is an inflammatory response that is triggering a fatigue, a good idea would be to actually calm down and reduce the pace of doing things. That's what we have experienced. When people come back reporting with fatigue, we've looked at it as a multi-dimensional problem that needs a multi-dimensional solution, rather than giving it one short answer per se. We have tried combining, when you say about mental health, was an important component, because we did realize that when people are not sleeping well, sleep is often disturbed in many people. In fact, we have one of the questions that has been coming over there about they're not able to sleep well. So we probably start at that level, say, we look at the sleep hygiene and say, if they're sleeping well or not. So if that is being addressed, then we move on to their nutritional components. The nutrition needs to be a healthy component. So we have a dietitian on team, so we look at that. And then we look at the medical markers. We look at blood markers, inflammatory markers. Is their body is undergoing an inflammatory process, if it is there. So all that is being looked at from the different teams' perspective. From the physiotherapy perspective, our working pattern has been this, that in people who experience fatigue, the idea is to go slow. We use strategies of pacing with them, where we get them to do a particular task in a staggered manner, allow them time to get used to doing the task, and then build endurance towards the task. In ergonomics, we've come across words like work hardening and work conditioning. We try and adapt those philosophies into the rehabilitation of people following COVID, wherein if somebody is experiencing fatigue, we explore the kind of activities what they're trying to do as part of their routine, and we try and evaluate their tolerance towards that activity and see if you could build the tolerance towards that activity in a paced manner, and side by side add on strength training, aerobic training exercises, simply because when you do aerobic training, it is known to improve the physical capacity of the person. But beyond that, it's also known, especially if it's done at a light to moderate intensity, to reduce inflammatory responses. So exercise has a beneficial effect in multiple levels. One, it sort of improves your overall fitness levels. It improves your activity tolerance. It reduces your inflammatory responses. It makes you hungry. Your nutrition can become better because your appetite is reset. And because you're spending energy by doing an activity, the sleep also has a potential to be corrected to an extent. Of course, they all work in unison. So we use a strategy that is multidimensional. But from PT perspective, this is how we approach and focus on it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Varsha, madam, could you please tell us anything relating to dietetics or nutrition, how can we counter post-COVID fatigue?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I think the focus should be on a balanced plate. We sometimes understand that the patients are not having that much amount of appetite. So it's easier to give them small frequent meals and a little calorie dense foods like having dates or having some nuts and seeds. help a long way. Foods could be freshly cooked, homemade, less spicy, non-greasy, very easy to digest. So we can start with simple soups, which is home done, that boosts the appetite. There are superfoods which can be included, nothing fancy, whatever is locally available, whether it is flax seeds or whether it is almonds, some sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds, any nuts and seeds can be added. Very important is to add protein, and I harp on protein because there is a lot of wasting. So instead of having 3 or 4 chapatis, even if the person is having 2 chapatis with big bowl of dal, that helps a lot, or just a boiled egg along with the breakfast, or a glass of milk as a mid-morning snack or a bedtime snack. These are certain things that people should not compromise on. Again, a good use of certain spices also help a lot, like spices like turmeric or cardamom, cinnamon. These help a lot. So any kind of herbal tea, or in South what we call as kashayam, also helps to build immunity. So basically be a little, instead of just focusing on, we always have a habit of focusing on one thing. We want that 1 teaspoon of Chyawanprash. So instead of doing that, try to adopt a healthy, holistic approach. So improve your diet, stay well hydrated, exercise a little bit, because that is also going to improve your digestion. So small things like 10 to 15 minutes walk after a major meal is not only going to improve your digestion but also improve your circulation. So small things, and you take, like someone said, take 1 day at a time, and you're on the path to recovery. So I think these are things, and suddenly people want to, we've seen people suddenly wanting to do crash diets, and that's completely not advisable. So a very holistic approach, I would say, that will help overcome many things, including fatigue, and restoring back their health as the pre-COVID condition. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Dr. Sri Krishna, sir, could you please give your views on how to counter post-COVID fatigue? Dr. Sri Krishna, sir, can you hear me?
Sudhir, yes. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
From psychiatric point of view, could you please share your views on how to counter post-COVID fatigue?
Post-COVID fatigue, one is good nourishment. Go into this, get vitamin D. That is first thing. So it helps in your immunity to fight against it builds up your immunity, vitamin D, when you take. And from the mental health point of view, don't take any decisions that use your mental energy during the initial phases of COVID, like emails or whatever, or any major decisions that you want to take, which is draining your mental energy, always postpone those decisions. And return to work in a phased manner. Don't rush. And for that, you need good colleagues and bosses too. I agree. But if you're not able to work, generally, even your boss says, I'm going to pay you a half salary, accept it, because ultimately your health is important than your salary. So don't return to work in a rush. Always say to him that I can't do this amount of work. Even though you cut down on my pay, I'm fine with it. But I'll be working in a phased manner. So
Okay,
one is return to work in a phased manner, having good nourishment, postponing decisions, and unplugging out from the stresses is more important. That's how you can fight this COVID fatigue mentally.
Thank you, sir.
That's it, Sudhir.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sundar, sir, could you please address how can an individual handle or address post-COVID myalgias, muscle aches?
Yes. We follow a similar strategy with what we used with fatigue, with a little bit of a modifications. When you're looking at myalgia, there's a bit of a vague kind of a sorry, pain and ache in the muscle. We're not sure about the reasons. A lot of people have reported with pain on joints, and muscle aches has been commonly used. We've used 3 strategies over here for people with myalgia. One is like a very gentle, deep heat. The idea is that it will increase circulation. If it's a localized myalgia, like for example, if it's in a thigh or a calf, or maybe a lower back, so gentle, deep heat, increasing circulation and improving, relaxing the tissues, something which I've tried using. As a general advice, we've asked people to have a nice lukewarm water bath, kind of a relaxation with that. And once they've heated the tissue a little bit, we ask them to go for a very gentle, relaxed stretching and combine that relaxed stretching with breathing exercises. Because breathing has a calming effect in terms of relaxing our body. And then when we combine that with stretches works on our muscle properties, helps us to respond well in terms of muscle flexibility, in terms of maintaining the muscle tone, it helps on that. So that's one thing what we've added. And we've also tried combining aerobic exercise as a strategy, a low load, gentle cycling or walking activity. It's low impact on the joints and muscles, but a low intensity is a strategy what we have used. We've had some of our nurses coming back to us with myalgias. So we've suggested them not to climb stairs too many times, try and take breaks in between, sit for a while, as continue to walk, and combine the other 3 strategies what we spoke about in between. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Syed, could you please give us some insight on exercise prescription for long COVID patients?
Sure. I think the coming to the meat of the whole agenda is this to understand what we ask the patients to do as an exercise. So I allude back to Dr. Sri Krishna and Dr. Sundar that yes, you need to make the patient first understand how important it is. That's what we are looking at. And the second important thing is, let us not forget that about 86% of the people who are affected with COVID could have a recurrence or could have a symptom coming back in about 7 months. So considering that fact, we don't want to exert the system. At the same time, we don't want to ignore the system. So I would go by probably what Dr. Sundar is doing to understand what kind of a physical activity pattern that this patient has. That's the primary thing that I would want to understand. If it is somebody who's newly starting to exercise just because they realize that, okay, their bodies couldn't handle COVID, or is it somebody who's been regularly exercising, but today, due to COVID, they're having a challenge. So both aerobic and resistance exercises have been recommended, and they're well proven that they're giving us the good effects of exercise come back. But the question here is whether you're doing these exercises in an outdoor environment or it is happening inside your house. So if I have to tailor-make the exercise prescription for the people who are accordingly exercising, and after the knowledge that I know that this person has done some exercise in the past or it is just the first time. So if it is somebody who's I'm taking who's never worked, who's never exercised, and who'll be newly starting this as a program, I would say if you're training outdoors, stick to about 100 steps per minute. That's the ideal. We usually say stick to 100 steps per minute kind of a pace. Or if you prefer to bike, take a bike and then just do about 12 to 14 kilometers an hour pace. That's the speed we would highly encourage them to take it up. Don't go beyond it. That because basically this is done about 2 to 3 days a week, and do it for about 20 to 30 minutes a day. Making sure that your maximum heart rate response doesn't exceed about 30 to 55%. That's the ideal way where we are looking at the fatigue component to be respected. At the same time, we don't want to end up having those myalgias, which Dr. Sundar has alluded to. But somebody who's regularly exercised in the past, who understands what a muscle soreness is, who could handle myalgia and fatigue in a better fashion as compared to somebody who we just spoke about earlier. In that person, yes, you can go about asking them to walk at a higher pace, which would be about 120 steps per minute, about half hour to an hour a day, 3 to 4 days a week, and push their heart rate response to about 60 to 80%. You're still safe, there are no cardiac implications. If they prefer to do jog, they prefer to do a cycling, yes, about 15 to 18 kilometers per hour is a good pace. And doing a jog, I would say do at least 40 pulses, which basically is higher than your resting heart rate. So you teach the patient how to take a resting heart rate, ask them to go about 40 pulses or 40 beats more than what they are able to handle at rest. That's how I would encourage somebody who's kind of done the exercise or wants to do the exercise outdoors. And for the same population, when it comes to doing the resistance exercises, I would say yes, stick to about 8 to 10. That's a global standard that we have in both people who are newly starting the exercise or who have been doing exercise in the past. But what they would definitely look at is the frequency. Somebody who's not done any resistance training in the past, do not go beyond 2 days per week, and make sure that your 1 RMs, that is your maximum resistance that you can take for once, should not exceed about 30 to 50%. But somebody who's done the exercise in the past, yes, they have got a little more luxury to explore, which is about 2 to 3 times a week, and they can go up to 50 to 70% of their 1 hour. So this is somehow proven to be very effective in terms of people who are doing their exercises outdoors. But knowing the scenario within India that we probably, at this point, especially with the Delta variant being too rampant there, I would encourage highly that people should think about adapting to some things at home rather than stepping into a gymnasium, which you're not very sure about the safety perspectives. So in such situations, yes, aerobic exercises, somebody who's starting to kind of start pretty early or haven't done anything, stick to about 10 to 20 minutes, sorry, in a day, and do about 1 to 3 sets of exercises. And what are these exercises we're talking about? It could be a simple squat, could be a shoulder press, it could be a sit-up, it could be a leg curl, anything which you can use using your basic resistance exercises at home. So let's say we have a step up, we have a staircase, yes, which is about good 30 to 40 centimeters high. You could go up to 60 to 70 steps per minute. That's a count you can keep. You have metronomes available on all smartphones these days, or you can just keep a count of yourself. And if you're walking, you've got a good corridor to walk or a good lawn to walk around in the house, about 70 to 90 steps per minute is a good pace to start with. And make sure that if you're doing a high-paced walk, do not exceed about 100 to 120 steps per minute. This is how you would start with. And then, of course, as you see the symptoms improve and as you're kind of building up your endurance on the muscle and the cardiovascular system, you're more than happy or more than welcome to actually push yourself to the next level. However, I would highly recommend that people should consult their physical therapists and their respirologists, if possible, a cardiologist, before they go ahead proceeding in terms of their intensities. I mean, I'll be happy to discuss about how each individual exercise could be taken, but I guess that will be a lot for this current program. So let's keep the other panelists busy.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Syed. Dr. Sri Krishna, sir, could you please tell, does a family or a friend or a colleague play any role in supporting post-COVID patients, and how?
Yeah, definitely. Family support and colleague support is totally necessary in post-COVID state. But how can how a family supports? Sudhir, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm with you.
I'm
with you, sir.
Yeah, fine. Sudhir, how can a family support in one way is providing good nourishment to the individual, either of the spouse who is affected and recovered. And one more thing, building confidence in him and showing empathy towards him. Post-COVID, there might be multiple reasons, multiple short-term disabilities might occur with the individual. He might throw frustrations, he might throw anger towards the other one, he or she might throw towards the other spouse. So always handles or listen to him or her with empathy, and if he or generally the physiotherapist or the treating pulmonologist generally ask these individuals to do these spirometry exercises post-COVID to increase their lung capacities. In case if he or she is not willing or not finding the energy, they both can do the exercises in right way, or anything combined they can with either he or she gets affected. Doing it in a combined way might be more it will be more supportive to the COVID affective individual. If even the wife or the husband also takes the spirometry and he also starts doing it, even though he or she is not affected, and this makes the other individual to generally do those things and going for walks and connecting with the relatives, connecting with friends, talking with them since he's in isolation for past 10, 15 days or 2 weeks. So connecting with other people and connecting with the friends or relatives also uh, might help in post-COVID. These kinds of support are generally advisable from family and colleagues to a post-COVID patient. That's it.
Thank you, sir. And Ms. Varsha Kopikar, madam. Usually, on every year, January 1st, we tend to take a resolution. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. In the same way, after going through such a hard time during the COVID infection, once the post-COVID phase, once the patient enters post-COVID phase, they understand where they are standing, like, when they are fighting the infection to return back to the normal life. So they tend to start, like, thinking as in they want to, they consider taking resolutions like, I'm going to hit the gym, I'm going to improve my diet, and I'm going to indulge myself in many social activities and sports and everything. So, are popular forms of diets like paleo or keto, intermittent fasting safe post-COVID?
No, they are not. So I normally tell the patients to go slow if they have, they want to really regain their health back. One should be a little more patient. They suddenly want to build muscles, and that's not going to happen overnight. So one has to understand that there has been a wasting which has to be corrected. The immunity levels have to improve, and all that is mapped to good health. Until and unless we don't address that, they are not going to improve even on the endurance part. Even if they want to hit the gym, there is a lot of fatigue. So start with simple walking. Maybe 1 week later, the exercise prescription can change. And this completely differs from one person to the other. Fat diets definitely don't help. And there is enough research to show that all the results that you get are very short lived. So a very sustainable approach is mapped for the person. And, we tell them we applaud the fact that they want to, they have taken some resolution towards good health. And a smarter approach would be to follow a balanced diet. First, improvise on that, and then depending on their goals, whether they want to lose weight or they want to build muscles, we can, each person can be guided accordingly. So I would still recommend a person to not just, Google search and take some things which are just there on the net. Instead, meet a dietitian and, get a personalized approach fixed, because each one diet does not fit everyone. So I would still feel that. So any kind like a paleo or a keto diet is definitely not recommended. Well, intermittent fasting has a lot of connotations. It's a way of life. And there is a lot to suggest that a simple intermittent fasting of maybe 10 to 12 hours between the last meal and the next day's first meal is proven to be very beneficial. So we recommend that. We recommend a simple intermittent fasting, nothing major. But if a person wants to do it, then we will guide them to, do it instead of just, one fine day. Your body needs to get adapted to everything. So intermittent fasting also, the body has to get adapted to what it's going to receive, and then you will see a lot of improvisation. There is a lot of detoxification at a cellular level which is happening, and we see remarkable results. But having said that, all this has to be done under supervision. So we have seen that patients have beautifully come out of their post-COVID fatigue. They have regained their health. They have started exercising, hitting their gyms. All that is possible, but they need to have patience. They cannot just think that, okay, now that I have made a resolution, I need to see results in a month or in 15 days. That's impossible to achieve. And we have seen a lot of people, and very sad to see very fit, so-called very fit people, succumbing to heart disease. And that is also because people go through a lot of yo-yo diets. So that is something which we strongly need to tell the enthusiasts and warn them about the ill effects of that. Yeah, that I think that's from my side.
Thank you, madam. Now, we do have a few questions from the audience as well, from the people who are attending the webinar, today's meeting. And before I can hand over to Dr. Harshavardhan, I would like to thank each and every one of you, the panel members, for providing your valuable time. And it has been immense privilege to be a part of this and to have an interaction with you all. Thank you once again, everybody. Dr. Harshavardhan, can you please take over?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And I really want to also mention that we have stuck to schedule, and we'll be taking a couple of questions from the audience. So there is a question from Priya Sharma. So the question is, what can be done for post-COVID chest pain? As she had pain in the lower lobe and both anterior and posterior mid swelling also. I think she means to say she has a lot of chest pain, both in the front and also the back portions of the chest. I think Nafis sir, can you please give some insights into this?
Definitely, Dr. Harshavardhan. First of all, the question seemed pretty vague to me, but definitely, as I understand that what you were looking at is whether this patient is indicating towards any cardiac involvement, or is it just something which is coming from the costochondritic kind of a symptom. So I would rather not throw assumptions on it, but understanding that this is coming from either of these two situations. If it's a cardiac related, the patient is experiencing an angina kind of pain, then yes, I would definitely want a screening done by a cardiologist to see if there's any exertional induced ischemic changes happening in the cardiac tissue. If that is ruled out, and if the EKG and the other relevant investigations are proven negative, then yes, the physical therapist is open to kind of explore his wings and see what we best can do to A, minimize the pain, and two, have a graded activity in a way that we don't induce an ischemic change in the cardiac tissue. But yes, if it is ruled out that there's no cardiac involvement at all, and it's just purely a musculoskeletal issue, because most of these patients who do have persistent dyspnea or having a cough which is not subsiding, pretty violent coughs, those have resulted in some amount of costochondritic related pain. So those pain patterns usually could be treated at home by just making sure that whenever you're doing that cough or whenever you're doing a deep breath, ensure that you're supporting that certain area. But yes, if it is something that needs intervention from physical therapists, then yes, obviously, as simple as a taping technique to as complex as the breath holding or stacking the breath slowly to minimize the pain could be effectively used. But again, I'm throwing these out with an assumption of no diagnosis, assuming that there is, yes, it's more cardiac or musculoskeletal. Hope that helps.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your insights. And speaking of breath holding, there is one more question. So somebody wants to ask whether breath holding time is seen as a good enough marker for gauging a cardiac or respiratory reserve function, and if improvement upon it should be added as a focal point during the rehab process.
It's a fantastic question, actually, and there's huge amount of research going on that particular perspective, because we are dealing with patients who are having tremendous dyspnea, both at rest and on exertion. And especially if I talk about long COVID, we may not see resting dyspnea, but definitely exertional dyspnea. So breath holding does act as one of those clinical measures that we could take, or a talk test essentially is also a good measure. But the problem we are looking at is, even when you saw the results coming from Mexico, one of the papers published from my lab, we looked into the patients being categorized as mild COVID, moderate COVID, and severe COVID patients. Strangely and very shockingly, what we saw is the DLCO, that's the oxygen, the carbon monoxide diffusion capacity of the lung, was found to be affected more in the moderately affected COVID rather than severely affected COVID. So that was statistically significantly different, the difference between those two groups. So mild did not show any significant impact, but the moderate disease did have a huge impact on their diffusion abilities. So if you're talking about doing a breath holding, you definitely would want to have, like Dr. Sundar was alluding earlier, that you need to be equipped enough at home if you're trying this at home to make sure that you have a saturation monitor where you know that what is happening with your breath holding, and rather than the perception of my ability to hold the breath as a clinical measure of my improvement, I would rather look at my saturation. I would look at my other characteristics like fatigue and my ability to perform my ADLs. These are some things that the patient should, if they're doing this at home. But yes, if this is happening under supervision, the experts can make a decision based on their 6-minute walk distance, which again, interestingly enough, that has been shown to be negatively impacted in the moderately affected, which is what we commonly see. The long COVIDs are all, they are moderately affected during the acute phase. So this is probably something that we should all be cognizant about, to understand that these are the guys who we'll be probably seeing for a long term. And when they come back, they either do have a restrictive pattern in their lung, and breath holding, yes, we do recommend at that point in time, but then you have to be very careful about how longer, and is that a measure that you want to use to show the improvement.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Harsha?
Dr. Harsha, there is a lot of background noise. Can you mute everyone? Sorry.
Is it fine now, ma'am?
Yeah.
Dr. Harsha, if time permits, can I add in to what Dr. Nafees was saying on breath holding?
Please, sir.
We did have some practical experiences. It's a very nice question, and Dr. Nafees has elaborately answered it. As a standard practice, as Dr. Nafees said, we do not recommend breath holding for a few reasons. I do not have research evidence to augment that, but this is what we've seen clinically with our patients. We've seen this a lot more in the acute phase, and to an extent as we go later. During the acute phase, there's a lot of inflammatory response going on. The lung tissue itself is a lot of inflammatory processes there. We've seen that when we ask our patients to do a deep breath, it actually triggers a very violent cough response with people. And as a strategy, we focused, as we modified our strategy to go ahead, and then we said, we will not look at deep breathing exercises with forceful deep breathing inspiratory holds. So in fact, there's some amount of literature to say that incentives spirometry may not be very beneficial, and we did see that in our clinical setting. Instead, we have focused a lot more on very relaxed, slow breathing pattern to facilitate lung functions per se. With breath holding, what can actually happen is that you tend to increase your reserves, you try to breathe into the maximum, and when you're holding in breath, and if the lung is not healed properly, you're probably likely to damage the lung a little more. And with cardiac involvement being there, somebody experiencing pericarditis, so you're probably likely to increase your intrathoracic pressures, and that may not be very well tolerated. So without a clinical exam and without prescription, it may not be a great idea to go in for breath holding as a strategy, unless and until if the therapist has asked the question, I'm sure the therapist, based on clinical examination, would be able to take a call. I'm aware that we have general public or your other colleagues also participating in this webinar. So I wouldn't want them to take it as a blanket rule that we could probably look at taking breath holding as a simple exercise. It's a very simple exercise to follow, but it's good to follow with precautions.
And actually causes a tons of dissociation between the cortical representation or the cortical control of the breathing. So dyspnea rather worsens than getting any better. So probably that's probably an important feature here that we have to keep in mind that should we be even recommending it if a patient is not equipped enough in his capacities to handle that. And like Dr. Sundar alluded that it is followed definitely, not just mostly, it's mostly definitive that you would have a huge bout of cough following when you try to do any breath holding or any deep inspiratory maneuver. So you got to be very cognizant of that before you prescribe that to your patient.
Right, right. I think, yes, sir, we'll keep it in mind. We'll be cautious. And sir, this is an open question. It is by Ms. Padmavati. I think it is also answered here by Ms. Varsha ma'am. Can you please elaborate? She has been taking a lot of food and she's not having proper body movement, and she admits that she's not great at doing exercises. She's now looking at going to a no carb diet. Is it suggestible to go to a no carb diet with good amount of proteins, minerals, and also vitamins?
So first, we have to understand the word carbs is not bad. We have to understand what kind of carbs a person is having. Yes, you can definitely completely restrict on the refined carbs, refined sugars, that is sugar, honey, jaggery, which contribute to a lot of calories. You can restrict maida or any white flour or any processed foods can be restricted. But carbs in general have a protein sparing effect. So that is the beauty of carbs. And carbs which are complex in nature, which are high in fiber, the millets or the whole grain wheat flour or any of the unpolished rice, that is in fact going to help you attain satiety. So instead of completely stopping, you can reduce the carb content, make it a little high fiber one, and include a good amount of vegetables, salads, and protein. So that combined gives you a better satiety. It meets all your what we call as recommended dietary allowances for all your macronutrients, that is your carbohydrate, protein, fat, and not only that, micronutrients in the form of your vitamins and minerals. So that's most important. So I will not recommend anybody to just stop carbs, not required.
Right, right, got it, ma'am. And Sri Krishna sir, we have a question for you. Sir, how do we deal with this memory loss problems or problems related to memory and remembrance? Sir? So this is a common question which was posted. Dr. Sri Krishna sir.
Okay. Memory, there's nothing like we can't remember something. It's only the repetition that makes us perfect. So I personally, many students start coming saying that I have read everything in the exam, but I couldn't write anything. I couldn't remember. I don't agree with those statements, because once you have understood and read, it is always there in the brain. And tips for good memory, I generally suggest them. You have read today and again practice after 2 days the same thing. While you're sleeping or while you're driving your car or whatever it is, just practice in your mind what you have read. And that's one way you can improve your memory. And other things, from the nutritional point of view, maybe Varsha Garu might laugh at what I say. Maybe beetroot juice might be helpful in memory.
We also suggest what we call as Shankapushpi, or some of the leaves are very beneficial. You have spirulina, you have the local greens. That is something that I recommend people. Brahmi is another one which is recommended for memory. So this is something which, but there is no, when we talk about evidence-based practice, there is very little research done, but Ayurveda suggests these, and we found it very beneficial. All these are basically dietary adjuncts to your main diet. So yeah, any kind of vegetable juice for that matter, beetroot, because it's very high in nitric oxide, which also helps. Yes.
Just to add on to Dr. Varsha's comment, I totally understand that we don't have the current evidence as on date which can prove the statements that we just made. But I believe whatever we have back from home, it's currently happening in West today. That in my own lab, I see that both spirulina and beetroot juice are getting tested, both for the antioxidative characteristics of both post-exercise. And unfortunately, COVID hit us. So COVID did not let us do a research to find whether this is helpful for people who are having issues, especially with the COVID. So hopefully in future, Dr. Varsha, we probably will have an answer for that, whether our natural resources like beetroot and spirulina would help us.
Yes, and what we also see, Dr. Nafees, is this is not like a, we keep telling the bottom line is to eat healthy. So it really doesn't matter. And one shouldn't take that as a magic pill. That one nowadays you have a spirulina capsule, and your spirulina capsule is not an answer to this to the solution. Yeah? I mean, it's not a magic pill to everything. So people want somewhere I feel that even when they come to us as as a dietitian, they expect that I should give them one thing that they can take as a magic pill. Unfortunately, we don't have that.
I totally reckon with you, and I totally agree with you. But in the fast world today, everybody wants one fix. So yeah, this is a big thing in US and Canada today, that the beet juice and the spirulina, supplements.
And we've seen great results also, especially as a a pre-workout drink also. Now we are a little deviating, but a pre-workout drink as a little spirulina and beetroot juice helps endurance, helps the performance much better.
Yeah. On a lighter side, madam, many people have started coming and saying that we have even take Saraswati Lehyam for intelligence. I don't want to name the companies who propagate it, but even mild MRK.
We have this all the time, sir. They, like I said, they need one, one magic pill. There are a lot of nutraceutical companies also promoting this, but I always advise them to take it as a dietary adjunct. There are a lot of studies being done on flax seeds, a good amount of studies being done on pumpkin seeds. So this can be safely prescribed. But certain things, there is always a risk that people will overdo it. I mean, when we tell them to have it in some small prescribed dose, they try to double or they try to multiply it, thinking that if they have multiple doses of it, that will give them quick results. So that's where the fear is.
Yes.
I think this is a common problem. Even we face this in therapy. So people think more therapy is good for them. And on that note, I think we have two other professionals other than physiotherapists who are here celebrating our physiotherapy day. Sir and ma'am, do you have anything to ask to the physiotherapy profession? We have two of the best physiotherapists on panel, and no other person to answer your questions the best. Is there anything you are wondering and you want to put forth to the physiotherapy professionals?
I would love to do that. There is a lot of increase in the sitting time, Dr. Nafees, and because of which we see a lot of repetitive stress, what we call as repetitive stress disorder or index, right? So what are your tips? How can, because all these are also asked to us. So I normally direct them to the physiotherapist, but any tips that you can give us, because continuously, if a person is sitting on the laptop or a desktop. Yeah.
That's a great question you asked, and probably the commonest that I encounter on a daily basis is this. From when I worked back in India, I was working as an ergonomist in the most reputed organization. You won't be able to take the name, sorry, but yeah, their job patterns are about 14 to 16 hours of work sitting on one desk, one chair kind of a situation. And I'm talking about young lads like 23-year-old, 25-year-olds who are making tons of money, but yeah, they don't have time to spend that money, unfortunately. So they end up having all these sedentary posture-related issues. The first and the foremost we saw is the back pain, followed by the neck pain. So the numbers are declining as we talk about the conditions, but The people who follow this kind of sedentary lifestyle are highly recommended to I mean, we have tons of these to name, but it's something called as ergonomic dance these days. So it takes about 45 seconds for you to just stand away from the chair and then just perform that dance, and then you're back in the chair. So people do wonder whether that 45 seconds is enough. Yes, it's happening, but it's happening multiple times. So we're talking about doing this ergonomic dance. I mean, you don't have to dance in an office environment, but ergonomic dance is something which is very commonly recommended these days, that you stretch your muscles and it takes about 45 seconds to finish, and you do this every hour. The second thing, yes, we all have read this and repeatedly heard about this, is position yourself in a place where you've got an opportunity to walk to the water table, you walk to the printer, you walk to anything which you know that you are accessing often. But yes, partial assessment and partial ergonomic corrections are primarily the first steps to be taken at this point, because prevention is always better than the cure. Second thing I would recommend is making sure that you are a person who is cognizant about, and I think Dr. Sri Krishna would be encountering all these patients often, that making a decision for yourself and making a kind of, how do I word this? Making a decision to yourself that you have to do good to yourself, I guess, is what is primarily important. And I've seen with my help of the dietary colleagues that I have, that we create an environment where people are given to believe that, yes, this program that we are planning for you, it's nothing but just asking them to be active. And what me and my dietary colleague do is essentially, you plan a diet, you have an exercise program in place, we print it, make it look flashy, and then, yeah, here you go. This is what you're going to be doing. And that makes an impact. Like, you tell them verbally, probably it doesn't happen, but when you actually draft it and then give it to them as a prescription, it definitely helps. So I highly recommend all the physio colleagues here today that, yes, what Dr. Varsha brought up is a very important key aspect that we are facing in this Western world and the Indian situation as well. So probably prescribing things and telling them what they do, putting them on a paper, and then giving them strategies to follow them periodically is the key of, I think, the success to come out of this repetitive stress trauma. Hope I answered that, Dr. Varsha.
Yes.
Sri Krishna sir. Sri Krishna sir, you're there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Sir, do you have a question for us, sir?
Yeah, nothing else. You people, I don't have any questions.
So, that is really good. Sundar sir, you want to tell something?
No, I'm good. I think it's going on fine. It's fine.
Right.
Just one comment to Ms. Varsha's question was that in posture, we try and use a philosophy saying that the best posture is the next posture. You know, it's a very simple statement. I realize that even if you buy the best of the ergonomics chairs, you design your station to the best scientific guidelines. But if you retain in that for a given duration of a time, you are bound to have a problem. So as Dr. Nafi has highlighted, frequent movement is essential. The recent research that's coming on is that the duration of break that we need is not even in minutes. It's actually, the recent study says about a 4-second exercise is good enough to offset the challenges that comes with sitting for a long duration of a time. Just that it has to be done more frequently. That's about it. Yeah. Thank you.
So just
Can I just take one more?
Please,
Because this is, you know, people just and these days everyone asks me, and I thought this is the best question that I can put to a team of physiotherapists here. Everyone asks me whether 10,000 steps is a benchmark, and suddenly everyone talks about 10,000 steps. Can you please throw some light on this 10,000 steps?
That's
If you want to take it?
Go ahead, Dr. Sundar. I'll take it later.
Yeah, 10,000 steps is a wonderful mark. I think Dr. Sri Krishna would agree that when we have a goal, it becomes easier for us to work towards that. A reasonable amount of research has happened on 10,000 steps to look at whether it offers protection. It's a great marker to look at. There are evidences to say that if you walk 10,000 steps, you're doing good. But the simple philosophy is this, that if you're walking at a comfortable walking pace, you're doing about close to 100 steps a minute at a very comfortable pace. You're not challenging yourselves much. So if you're walking for 30 minutes, you're doing about 3,000 odd steps. And then if you're moving around in a daily routine for other general daily chores, not of an exercise, for another about 1 hour or so, so you're accumulating close to 10,000 plus steps in terms of a movement. So when your target is to reach 10,000 steps, it's not just as an exercise. It indicates that you're spending a reasonable amount of time moving around. So it has offered benefits. But whether 10,000 steps is a true gold standard or a benchmark that everybody can achieve, probably not is what the answer is. It depends on the health status of an individual, and it also depends on the state at which an individual is with regard to their exercise habits and their age and other parameters. When it came to COVID, one of the strategies what we'd actually used, we again adapted from cancer rehab into COVID program over there. When we started after the immediate discharge period, when they started moving in, we actually gave them step targets of 1,500 to 2,000 steps per day. It's about 20 minutes of movement actually. And for their conditioning, that itself was a huge challenge. They were quite independent. If you use the post-COVID functional status scale, they would say that they're independent. They probably will grade them on grade 1. They're quite independent to be on their own, but they would not be able to reach a target of 10,000 steps. We in fact started with 1,500 to 2,000 steps, and then we gradually moved forward. When you shift to a scale to a different population, like elderly people, 6,000 steps is actually considered as a reasonably good benchmark to account for. Multiple studies have shown that people who walk at least 6,000 steps in a day have a lower risk of fall, who are more functionally independent, and they also report better quality of life. So the question about 10,000 steps, is that a uniform target for everybody? Probably not. There is science behind it to reach a target of that level in terms of the metabolic load that places, the time what is spent moving. So there are benefits of it, but it need not be a goal for everybody to look at. So when we prescribe, we look at the patient or individual, and based on their status, we recommend them an appropriate step. Yeah. Over to you.
So much.
Yeah.
And just to add to Dr. Sundar's comments, I believe Dr. Varsha is there is some amount of research, not a high quality one, but definitely there has been a study quickly done to understand whether this 10,000 the steps number is the ideal. Is yes, if you do a 30-minute physical activity in a day, that has shown that it is close to about 9,600 physical steps that we take. Both we haven't done a lot of energy expenditure correlation to this, but then definitely the physical exertion component has been attributed to it. So we found that yes, if you do about 30 minutes, which is what the Canadian standard guidelines of physical activity today are, you do about 30 minutes of exercise a day, yes, you're equating to about less than, close to at least shy of 10,000 steps a day. So that's why, to keep it easy for a common man to understand, just exercise 30 minutes per day or keep it as 10,000 steps. Given that this is the caveat of it, like do you want to do this 10,000 steps at your own pace, or you actually want to do it as an exercise? So that's where the physical therapist would come into picture to understand the clinical scenario of the patient, and then push them to do those 10,000 or plus steps, keeping the cardiovascular system safe. That's one way to look at it, or just give it as a prescription written on the paper. That yes, no matter what you do, how you do 10,000 steps, whatever it is, we succeed in making the patient walk or making the patient active. So essentially, we hope that we reap some benefit from there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Sundar. But before I deliver the vote of thanks, I would want to mention that Geetham School of Physiotherapy offers a 4-year professional program with a mandatory 6 months internship. So these are the admission eligibility criteria. And here we are preparing people to become a global therapist or a global healthcare practitioner. So we have curated the program such that the credit points are enough to move anywhere in the world. So you'll be easily able to transition from India to any other platform you're looking at. And we are going to deliver the best in class education. And saying that, let me just move into the vote of thanks. So first and foremost, I want to give my sincerest and deepest gratitude to the management of Geetham University for providing us with this occasion. I would like to express my thanks to all the eminent panelists, Ms. Varsha Kopikar, Dr. Sundar, Dr. Nafisar. I know it is very, very early in the morning, or some call it midnight over here. Dr. Sri Krishna sir, for gracing this occasion and enlightening us with your valuable knowledge. I express my gratitude to the director of GSPT for her constant support and leadership. I would like to thank the whole team at GSPT for their cooperation for this event. I thank all the persons who are directly or indirectly who have supported us for organizing this event. I would also like to thank Dr. Ranganath sir, Dr. Raghuveer sir for their unique insights, guidance and cooperation. I would also like to thank Dr. Sudhir and Dr. Veernath sir for their excellent management of the clinic and also the event. I specifically want to thank Dr. Sudhir for managing the whole event and moderating it. I would also like to thank Dr. Anishma and Dr. Vinil for their hard work and dedication for making this event, events a grand success. And today, we also want to express our gratitude to physiotherapists all over the world on this occasion of World Physiotherapy Day. And thank you for your time, sir, and time, sir, ma'am, and everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for having us all here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hope you have a
Thank
good
you for
day.
the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Harsha. Thank you, Dr. Sudhir, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madhuri Garu, for giving us the opportunity. It was a different webinar with physiotherapists and dietitian. It was a nice experience and I really had fun.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
We'll leave.